Today's episode of JayEmm on Cars does contain some language which may make it unsuitable for younger viewers. In fairness, there are only 2 swears, they're at about 18 minutes in, but one of them is JayEmm on Cars is kindly sponsored by Car Vertical, the only car history checking service you'll need, which references more than 20 databases globally to make sure you don't buy a car with a hidden past. For a special discount on the service, please use the link in the description down below. And now, today's feature presentation.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another video from me that's going to be a little bit of everything. Part blog, part review, part just general ramble and drive on a wonderful evening. First off though, we need to change the scenery. That's a bit better, don't you think? This really was a genuinely unplanned video. I popped to see a friend of mine, Michael, and he said to me, I'm quite busy over the next few days doing housework and renovations and things. Do you want to borrow my McLaren? I'm lucky to have friends like that, and of course I said yes. Obviously I did the neighbourly thing and left him with my Ferrari, but in all honesty, when the weather's like this, just as happy to be driving the McLaren. Now this car's actually featured on the channel a couple of times before, but I've actually had it now for a day or two, and I've really gotten to know this car in a way that I haven't really any other previous McLaren. It has some strengths, it has some weaknesses, and of course it's not a perfect thing. Those of you who are McLaren fans, don't worry though, you may extinguish your torches and pack away your ceremonial pitchforks, because this is not a McLaren bashing video. There is a McLaren I know that's having, unfortunately, quite a few very serious issues, but this is not one of them, and this I think is really core to the McLaren experience. There are lots of people out there who've had nothing but trouble, and there are also other people out there who've had nothing but good times, and I'm happy to say Michael is one of those. A lot of people would tell you that the 12C is a car to avoid. It's an early McLaren, it has foibles, whatever a foib is, but this car has been very good to him, and it's not for lack of driving. Indeed, he's put about 7,000 miles on this car. Granted, that's only brought the total up to about 14,500, but in supercar terms, that's actually pretty good. This is a very early car too. You can tell that because down here it in fact says MP4-12C. This is before they renamed it. If somebody happens to know why they called it the 12C, I'd love to know. I know where the MP4 bit came from. That's McLaren Project 4, I think. Ron Dennis called all of his ventures projects and numbered them, and McLaren, I believe, was Project 4. The 12C bit, I'm not sure. I always imagined it was sort of trying to lull people into thinking it was a 12-cylinder car, or maybe they thought it was 12-cylinder performance or something like that. But just in case you have been living under a rock, let's quickly recap what this car is and how it's going to fit into today's video and the context of a playlist I've been working on recently, which is my Boxster alternative list. This is a 12C Spider. You pick one of these up now for about 80 to 100,000 pounds, depending on specifications, so on and so forth. The first car that McLaren made in the modern era, carbon fibre tub, obviously this one being the convertible version. They did do a coupe first, 3.8 litre twin turbo V8 made by Ricardo out the back, and it makes here, I believe, 626 horsepower. Early cars made a little bit less than 600 horsepower, but they later revised them, and I think all of them got the 625 brake upgrade, I think, for free. Things you couldn't get for free included the upgraded infotainment, which was quite a bit more money and still not very good. Another item that I think is quite important if you are going to be buying one of these that my friend has retrofitted to this car is soft closed doors, because without them you have to be quite brutal actually with trying to get this thing to shut. The passenger door in particular, you really had to slam to get it to close, and when you start doing that you run the risk of breaking the AC controls and things that are over there. Now those are very expensive indeed. They are a lot more money as it happens than fitting soft close, so that's what he did. This car is serviced and maintained by Thorny Motorsport, with whom it also has a warranty, and that's something we're going to talk about in a bit. Now I've been doing this little Boxster alternative playlist, and I started fairly sensibly with a Mazda MX-5 and a Mercedes-Benz SLK-55, but I've gone a little bit off-piste recently with the Maserati Gran Cabrio, and now this. This is far more expensive than the first three by a factor of about 2 or 3. It's a lot of money, but so these days is a Boxster. In fact, it is quite possible to spend £75,000 to £80,000 on a Boxster. Crazy to think, isn't it? But it's true, and you can spend probably a bit more than that if you wanted a Spider, and I'm sure people will argue until the cows come home just how much it's worth the money Porsche are asking. However, if you are even the mildest of petrol heads, you won't have failed to be browsing through the classifieds and go, for the price of a new Porsche, I could have a used supercar. Now, your obvious choice might be a Ferrari, but the fact is Ferrari prices are very high at the minute, so your £80,000, let's call it, doesn't really get you a lot. It would get you the bottom end of an F430 market, a reasonably good condition 360, but it certainly wouldn't get you anywhere near a 458, which is this car's natural rival, and it definitely wouldn't get you a 488. As it happens, the 458 and 488 are more or less priced the same at the minute, such is the way the market's going. So this, on the face of it, really is a bargain. And the last time I featured one of these, I said that now was the time to buy, because they're sitting in that sort of nice period where they should have enough miles on them now where the problems have been found, but they haven't got cheap enough or been around for long enough that they've been bought out by the sort of people who are just going to tune them up and absolutely wreck them. That, I fear, is only just around the corner. Over the past 2 years or so, due I think to a number of factors, these have actually held their money very well. In actual fact, if anything, they've gone up. Now, all car prices have gone up of late, so I don't think that's a particularly McLaren thing, but it's good to see. In fact, prices across the board for McLaren seem to be stabilising at the minute. That's probably because if you want to buy a new car, you're either going to pay through the nose for it, or they're simply not building it. There is no planned replacement at the moment for the 720, and that may not come for another couple of years, so if you want one of those, you might as well just buy a used one, and if you don't really want to spend that amount of money and you want to get the supercar experience, a 12C or a 650S is a very good buy indeed. But are they worth the hassle? Are they worth the trouble? And what's it really like to live with day to day? Well, one of the Porsche Boxster's strengths is how practical it is, and the McLaren can also more or less match that car. Okay, not quite as much room as a Boxster, but it's really not far behind. That front boot, impressively capacious, and with the drop top, you've even got a little bit of storage and the tonneau at the rear for when the roof is up, which is excellent, perfect if you're doing a long journey, and this is an amazing car to do a long journey in. I've just been up to Scotland in a Lamborghini Huracan, and I have to say, getting there was utter misery. This would have been a far, far finer car for that task. It really would have. These are very comfortable, although I have to say, when they came out, people talked about them as if they rode like a Rolls Royce and all that jazz, and look, they're very, very good ride quality. However, having now sampled a 458, I don't really think it's sort of night and day different to that car. Honestly, I don't. I'm driving the car in sort of normal mode on the handling, or sport on the powertrain, and it's exceptional. I mean, it's really, really very good, but miles better than the Ferrari? I don't think so. The engine here also is very, very unrefined. I've driven a whole host of McLaren products now, and I'd really forgotten quite how coarse this is. It's got an amazingly lumpy idle, to the point where I'm not sure if it's actually broken or not. And when you're moving around town, the gearbox is a little bit dim-witted. You do actually really need to use the precog feature quite a bit. This is a thing McLaren were very proud of in the early days. The idea being, if you sort of half pull the gear lever, the dual clutch seamless shift 7-speed unit here will pre-select your next gear for you, so when you actually fully press it or pull it, you will get the gear straight away. Now, there's a bit of a flaw in that theory, which is that most people, by the time they're putting their hand on the gear paddle, that means they want the gear now. And as I will demonstrate to you, this car, not so good. So, first, there's the gear. So you hear the click? It's not that good. But if I hold down, hold, and then much faster. Moving through the different powertrain modes doesn't really seem to change the ferocity of the gear shift much, certainly not at normal road speeds. What it does do in these cars, though, is dial back the traction control, and you need to be wary of that. You put this thing in track, and you put your foot down, even on a dry day like today, I found this out earlier, in second, she will go quite sideways. But it's an odd one because although it is exceptionally capable, I mean, this thing can dominate a road like few other things can, I'm not sure I really want to drive it that quick. The steering is good, but it's also not McLaren's best. It's probably roughly equivalent to the 458, not in speed, but in just overall quality. The 458 is very quick, too quick, I think, a little bit darty, but also somewhat aloof. This has slightly better connection to the road, maybe better texture. It's a little bit slower, a little bit easier, more predictable, very Evora-like in many ways, but McLaren did get it better. The 570 is still some of the best steering in any car I've ever driven, just full stop. Absolutely sensational. Engine, very old school, very boosty, very laggy. Below about 3,000 RPM, it just does not have, well, anything really at all. I mean, let's put this in, okay, fifth, so it's quite a long way, but 2,000 RPM, foot down, not really much there. If you do have the luxury of on occasion driving a sort of big engine Ferrari V12, or indeed, well, any big V12 actually, you'll find those are quite a different experience. Now, I've grown to love those, but there's a place in my heart for a car like this too, because although it may be a little unresponsive and laggy below 3,000 RPM, when you get it above 3 grand, oh, it's quite nice, to a point that actually I quite like it. It's full of character, this engine. It got bashed in the early days for not having much of that, but no, I think it did. It just wasn't a Ferrari unit. And I think that's what people were expecting, and I can understand why, because let's face it, it was a 3.8 litre twin turbo flat plane crank V8, flat plane crank bit being important, and I think people therefore expected it to be just like a Ferrari engine, and it wasn't. The 570s have a different exhaust manifold layout. I believe they're equal length and these are unequal, and that gives the whole thing a very different flavour. So this is quite a different engine. And indeed, although even the sort of Senna and Elva are still using ultimately a variant of the same thing, they have really refined it, they have changed it. The 720 was a big leap forward, not just in terms of power, but in the torque spread, the usability of it, the response. It was a much better engine. Noise is definitely something people talk about a lot with McLarens, and the thing with this car is actually driving around at town doing 20 mile an hour now, yeah, I love it. It's got this nice sort of flat plane crank, very busy kind of sound, lots of pops, cracks and burbles, and they don't sound forced at all, and you've got this real sort of promise of serious performance, but the minute you put your foot down, it all kind of just turns into a sort of big sort of whooshy mess. You never really get a sort of sonic reward for having put your boot all the way in, which is a shame. I also have a real appreciation for the purity of this car's styling. When it came out, I remember a lot of people, myself included, criticised it for being rather bland, but actually I think it's aged exceptionally well, very cohesive, although it does need a good colour, because it isn't particularly dramatic to look at, a bit like, say, the first Audi R8s, you need a good colour to pull it off, and there's no better colour in my mind than Volcano Red. This is absolutely sensational. It's the colour for a 12C. The 650 doesn't wear it anywhere near as well. If you're wondering how to spot the difference between the two, it's very easy. The front end of the 650 is totally different, looks like a P1. From the rear, they look pretty much the same, but from the side, there are differences too. The way the side blades work, so the 650 has more of just a traditional big scoop, whereas this has a sort of more complicated, like bisecting the air kind of layout, which they dropped. The interior of this car has also aged really well. Everything still feels quite nice. This has a combination of leather and Alcantara, red contrast stitching, carbon fibre all over the place, this steering wheel with no buttons on it. The displays here are nice and clear, if a little bit confusing to get used to, and the overall layout of it is just really quite elegant. I love this shape that just moves through the whole cabin. It all does feel rather nice. Quite cramped though. It's not a big cockpit at all, and it feels like the steering wheel is kind of on the floor. It feels like the whole dash has melted. Everything is just so low to the ground. It's the complete opposite to a Lamborghini cockpit, and it's very different from a Ferrari. You step from one of these into an F8 and it'll feel like you've moved from a broom cupboard into the dining room. It's massively different, these cars, on the inside, but they both got their charms and their appeals. If you were thinking that the last 10 years has really done anything to blunt the ability of this car down your classic British road, think again. of my videos, I talk about the ability of a car to flow down a road, to really work with the surface. A lot of sports cars, very busy suspension at low speeds, but they're truly brilliant. Once you get them up to a certain pace, everything just kind of clicks and it all works, and suddenly it's like someone's just steamrolled the tarmac. Everything just works, and this is one of the finest examples of that you will ever find. That's quite an odd thing, because it's not actually the smoothest car to drive, and I do have a suspicion that a little bit of this car's suspension may need looking at, because it was making some clonks and knocks earlier, and it felt just a little bit unsettled in some of the bends. And oh wow, there's a car that just went past. Now I couldn't really identify which of the cars it was, because there was two. One of them was a real Bob Marley enthusiast. Woo! Can also tell you, if you were thinking of buying a Porsche and maybe you're considering one of these instead, don't let anybody try and tell you that a Boxster's just as good. It's not even close. Not only is it not in the same league, they're barely even playing the same sport. The reaction you get in one of these, the looks, the stares, and in a McLaren, people really love you, especially here in Britain. It's a cool brand. It's a nice car to own. The ownership experience, rather famously, can be a little bit mixed. But if you are thinking of buying one of these, my advice would be to buy the one with the most miles on it you could possibly find, that you're happy buying and is of course the right car for you. Take it to Thorny, get it inspected, and then get a Thorny warranty on it, and then you're sorted. Now the cost of doing that is roughly about £3,000 a year. And if you're the sort of person who thinks that's just too much money, well then I can tell you, this is definitely not the right car for you. Just simple as that, sorry, it's not. It's £250 a month. If that's too much money to run a car like this, then yeah, maybe go and get a Boxster, go and get a new Boxster and get your warranty chucked in for free. However, if you did the real honest maths on it, depending of course on how you pay for the car, because finance will make a big difference, over the course of, I'd say, 3 to 5 years, you've got a very realistic chance of this actually working out as the cheaper proposition. Because if you pick one of these up at about 85 grand, I'd say there's a real possibility in about 3 or 4 years' time it could still be worth about 80 grand. That doesn't seem unrealistic. However, buy a new Boxster, and I more or less guarantee you, you're going to lose quite a bit of cash. Fuck me! Holy shit! So, there is one of the dangers. There is one of the dangers of low sports cars. This is why I tell people to buy a car in as bright a colour as you possibly can. That car, I'm not sure he even saw me. I'm not even sure he even saw me. That was terrifying. That was absolutely terrifying. So I'm going to back off for a little bit, because that has really rather shaken me. I'm going to carry on, of course, because I'm a professional. And one day I want to be able to afford something a bit like this. I'll have a 650S though, please. Green, maybe. Anyway, 675 LT? Yeah, who cares? The thing about this car, yes, it is a supercar. Definitely a supercar. However, the way it drives, the way it feels, the way I seem to be driving it is definitely geared more towards the sort of GT end of things, because it is quite comfortable. I'm going over a very rough road at the minute, and this car's doing an admirable job of coping with it. But actually, I just, yeah, it's fun to wring its neck on occasion, and it's exceedingly capable, but I think I rather enjoy just doing the big long journeys with it. I enjoy looking at it. I enjoy listening to it at low RPM more than I do at high RPM. It seems a lot happier. There are better cars out there, I think, at doing the whole, 10/10ths thing. There are better McLarens out there at doing the 10/10ths thing. The 720S, certainly a more competent car if you really want to go that fast. But this is already fast enough for the majority of people, I would wager. It's fast enough for me. But it doesn't quite deliver those sort of intimate thrills that I want from a full-blooded supercar, if that's what you're after. Now, please don't see it as a slight against this. No, far from it. It's still a very, very good car. And I think history really should remember this quite fondly, because we've got to remember, this is McLaren's first car, really. I know people say, oh, but the F1 and the SLR. No, it's basically a different company built those. This really is McLaren Automotive's first attempt, and as first attempt goes, it's fast, it's exotic. If you get a good one, it can be pretty decent to own. There are now specialists out there who will support these. If you want to mod it, you can, but I really would say don't. And it's even quite economical. Now, a lot of people would look at one of these and think, oh, I can't afford the fuel, but trust me, you can afford the fuel in one of these. If you can afford the fuel in a Boxster, if you can afford the fuel in an SLK55, you can afford the fuel in one of these. It will do over 30 to the gallon on a run easily. I mean, really easily. For something with over 600 horsepower, that's absolutely sensational. And it's just something that is so utterly and totally filled with drama and cool, proper supercar stuff. That big wing at the back that pops up when you're really on the brakes, all sorts of stuff. It's amazing. I know full well, I have made my bed, I will forever be that guy that hates McLarens. But the truth is, I am that guy that hates McLaren, not McLarens. Big difference. Big difference. And this is a fabulous motor car. Is it quite as good as a Ferrari 488 or 458? No, not quite. Is it half the car of a 458? Absolutely not. It's far, far more than that. And day to day, it is the Ferrari's equal. Maybe it's only when you're really at sort of Chris Harris type speeds and at Chris Harris slip angles where the differences really appear. And that's somewhere I'm not really ever going to venture. I am currently on the hunt for a new supercar to replace my Gallardo. And I am looking at McLarens. Should I buy one? You tell me. Anyway, thanks all for watching. Hope you've enjoyed just a little ramble about the McLaren 12C. If you want to know more about this car, more about the ownership experience, or just anything in general, please do get in touch in the comments section down below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and I will see you for the next one. Bye-bye.